Greetings. My name is Felicia Perry. I'm the Executive Director of the West Broadway Business and Area Coalition. WBC works to support local business owners and businesses in several ways. We serve as a resource to connect technical assistance providers. We offer financial resources through our various partnerships, and we advocate for businesses along the West Broadway corridor and connect business owners to each other so that they can develop stronger relationships in North Minneapolis. Our membership supports these activities put on by WBC, including the Northside Business Luncheon, our Flow Northside Arts Crawl, Black Friday on Broadway, and Open Streets West Broadway. You can find out more about our work at www.westbroadway.org. Now, this month's topic is cultural districts, and in light of recent events, the structure of this luncheon was a little bit different. And so rather than having the traditional panel, we invited community members and business owners to ask questions. Some were sent ahead of time, but there was a lot of action going on in the chat section, including people posting their business cards and all kinds of exciting things. So I invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy this month's panel.
Hello, everyone. This is Warren McLean, president of N.E.O.N. Thanks so much for joining us for this month's luncheon on cultural districts. Before going over other updates, I wanted to say how heartbroken Team N.E.O.N is over the blatantly racist murder of George Floyd. Our commitment to the people, small business owners, and community development organizations of the Twin Cities is firm. We will fight systemic racism and institutional racism that still permeates and destroys the community we love. Throughout this trying time, we will remain dedicated to supporting the people, businesses, and nonprofits that are fighting for economic, social, and racial justice. For Northside businesses that face damages in light of the recent uprising, N.E.O.N's compiled a list of resources available on N.E.O.N's website on the Northside business damages. N.E.O.N also continues to maintain a list of resources for businesses impacted by the pandemic on our website under COVID-19 business information. Currently, there's up to $10,000 in grants available through deed for brick and mortar businesses with less than 50 employees. The deadline to apply is Thursday, July 2nd. If you have any questions, you can email Anna at neon-mn.org. Finally, we're excited to announce that N.E.O.N will be reopening with restrictions starting Wednesday, July 1st. Things will be different for the foreseeable future, and we want to let you know what to expect when visiting N.E.O.N. Meetings with a business advisor will be by appointment only. The door will remain locked, and we will require a N.E.O.N staff person to unlock it. Visitors and N.E.O.N staff are expected to wear masks when they are in the office and maintain social distancing. N.E.O.N's workshops, Think About Business and Food Business 101 will continue to be held online. If you have any questions, you can email Tina at neon-mn.org. Once again, N.E.O.N staff is here for you and your business. You are not alone. We hope you enjoy the discussion.
Yeah, so we can definitely get started. So once again, my name is Anna and I work for N.E.O.N. And so this luncheon is about cultural districts. And what we want to do first is just have the panelists, Jeremiah Ellison, council member of Ward 4, and Shauen Pearce of the Mayor's Office, Director of Equity and Inclusion. Here we go, hello. Just give a little brief description of what cultural districts are, just to make sure that we're all on the same page here. And then after that, we're gonna go into some questions. Some people gave me some questions beforehand that I want to be able to ask first. And then we're gonna open it up to everyone and make sure that we have a really great Q&A with these panelists. So I'm going to turn it over to the panelists really quick just to give a brief little summary of what cultural districts are, why they're important. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeremiah and Shauen.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Okay, cool. I was going to say, it wasn't letting me unmute myself.
Okay. Councilmember, do you want to start off?
Sure, yeah, I'll start off. I'll start off super high level. I think that there's the getting into the nitty gritty of what the cultural districts are, which we will get into. But also, I think that there is, the cultural districts are really an acknowledgement that we have these corridors in our city that were made and created and really invested in by communities for a long time with maybe little to no help. And that when you look at communities who have created these cultural spaces, spaces that feel safe for Indigenous people, for Black people, for Latino immigrants, or Southeast Asian or African immigrants, that we as a city feel like instead of allowing communities to be have their rent extracted, that we want them to own their buildings. Rather than having those businesses go with little to no support, that we want them to have support. Understanding that if the streets get to be sort of clean in the business corridors over at 50th and France, all due respect to 50th and France, that if those business corridors get to have clean streets and good lighting, that then West Broadway needs to have that, that East Lake Street needs to have that. And so the cultural districts are an acknowledgement that that communities have created beauty on their own, sometimes despite circumstances that the city has created, and that it's time for us to invest and be supportive of those efforts. So that's what I'll say there.
Perfect. As I would just add, officially good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you. Thanks for having us. In addition to what Councilmember was just highlighting, I think so often we hear things like cultural corridors or cultural districts throughout our country. And actually, if you look at that with this Little Haiti, or if you look across the river at Little Mekong and some of these other experiences, they are moments in time. They are a weekend, an evening, an art museum, or something of that nature. It's not usually a destination. It's not usually a home for the businesses that are part of that community, with the exception of Japantown in San Francisco. And so the cultural districts is really meant to be not like put a mural on the side of the wall strategy, which is outstanding work. It's meant to be make sure that you own your real estate, make sure you have control of your destiny, make sure you're driving and controlling the destiny of what's going on around you, and make sure that, frankly, our communities have the amenities that they've been demanding for generations. So it's, I agree with the council member, it's an acknowledgement, and it's also a signal internally at the city, frankly, and for the public, that we are shifting the way that we are doing business. And, it's not always pretty. I always say that the city of Minneapolis as a government is like an oil tanker, and we're trying to turn it more into like a kayak or a canoe, or something that is much more nimble, much more going with the flow, and much more responsive to what's going on around it. And so part of that work is, yes, about the immediate budget and the funding that was put into the budget before, which is all now being reevaluated given the public health pandemic first. And we're still fighting to keep the cultural districts funding in that. But it's also about just what happens when you say you want to expand your business, right? Are you going to be met with a team that is going to welcome you and say, I get that you are a sole proprietor and you don't have time to figure out the architecture stuff and to do all the licensing and everything else. And so we're going to bring the team around you to do that. Or are you going to be met with what we have already heard from many people, which has been a sense of figure it out, come back to us when you have money and you know how to do everything, and your pro forma, your finances look exactly like everybody else's in downtown and 50th in France. And so it's shifting the city also to align the resources that we already have so that they can finally get to, frankly, you all in the businesses within these cultural districts that typically are not touched by them.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that little summary. So I'm just going to kind of go into our first question here, and that really relates to what you two were talking about. So there are 6 cultural districts. Can you just list those just so people know what they are? And then who do they affect? What are the opportunities present?
Mm-hmm. Sure, I can take that. So starting north to south is West Broadway. I'm going to hop around a little bit, you guys. So West Broadway, parts of West Broadway, almost the entirety of West Broadway from Lyndale, for 94, I should say. Central, parts of Central, really where there's areas of concentrated poverty, where it's 50% or more people of color. Franklin Avenue, which is actually the first self-designated cultural corridor where the Native community actually got together many, many years ago, and they put together a blueprint for economic and social development in the community there. Parts of Cedar, and I'm saying Cedar, not Cedar Riverside, so parts of Cedar. East Lake, parts of Lake Street really, because Lake Street is expansive, and then 38th. And a lot of people who are newer or don't know this about our city, but 38th is actually a historically African-American corridor that in some ways is sort of mid or post gentrification. So it looks a little bit different. But what I love about 38th in terms of like how it relates to West Broadway is that in both areas, you actually have people who own their businesses. And some people along 38th actually own the land. So to the point of like, so what do people stand to benefit? Who are the direct beneficiaries? It's really centered around the primary demographics of the people in the area. But I will tell you that as we were going through lots of community engagement sessions, feedback loops over about an 18 or 20 month period, two things became really clear. One, people didn't want, it was a mix, but the overwhelming majority of people said, name the district for the district, don't name the district for a specific group of people. Because it's like, so if you pull the demographic data for Franklin, for example, it actually is a very large Black and Latinx area. It is not necessarily a high Native community because statistically they get dropped out because it's such a small percentage of the population. So data alone doesn't tell the story of the truth of the people who've built an area. And the fact is gentrification have pushed people out. So really I would say at the forefront here is like retention of the people who are already in place. Whether that's a business owner that's already in place, being able to grow and become the owners of the real estate, to expand operations, to get more business, retention of the entrepreneurs in the surrounding area, and hopefully seeing them become, even maybe not real estate owners, but to have spaces and places within the district over time. And then I think a welcoming of people who frankly have been displaced from a business standpoint from the areas because either they didn't have real estate or any number of factors. So I think about all of the people who are actually North Minneapolis residents as an example, who actually have businesses in other places, not even in the city, but in the state because real estate is cheaper or was more available. And it's like, how do we get them to come home? How do we get them to bring those amenities back to community if they want to? So I'll stop there. There's much more, but those are the high points.
Great. Do you have anything to add?
I actually think that was a really great response, and don't have a ton to add, but am definitely curious to get to more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay, so the next question is, who do people connect with regarding involvement in shaping what the West Broadway Cultural District looks like? What about the other cultural districts? So kind of have those discussions been happening? How do business owners and residents get involved in that?
So I think that for as far as how do folks get involved, obviously CPED is a great place to start as far as getting involved. My office, Shaun, are happy to sort of connect folks with those mechanisms in the city. I can't remember off the top of my head, so Felicia, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the city is also going to be interfacing with WBC and other organizations to help us facilitate those relationships as well. And so over time, I'm like, Felicia, as always, is going to be that perfect sort of touch point as well, getting you access to resources at the city. So that's sort of the shortest answer that I could think of. But if Felicia or Shaun have things to add, would love to hear that.
I'm sure.
Yes. And to add to that, WBC, we have strong collaborative partnerships with N.E.O.N. We also work with Black Women's Wealth Alliance, and those are also organizations right here on the corridor that have been supporting a lot of you on this call, as well as will be a part of this work moving forward. So yes, we're all here to support you all.
Yeah, and I just say, I know some people have asked, like, how do we get to this point? It was a lot of ways. There was a moment where UROC actually hosted a critical conversation around cultural districts and people came together and informed it. There were meetings that happened over at the Davis Center and in other places, and people came together and informed it. But I think, what I've really stressed about Northside and about the businesses along West Broadway, and I'm always up for being corrected if I'm wrong or misunderstood here, just in general, frankly, is that y'all have been saying what you've wanted for a very long time and what's been necessary. And that like the city cannot keep saying, well, oh, we have to go through this process and we need to find out what they need. It's like, no, we just have to execute, right? Like you said that you need to clean the streets, and right? And so like the streets need to be cleaned. We've said that you need lighting. It needs to be cleaned. You've said that like the city and the county owning property and just holding it in what feels like perpetuity is insufficient, and ownership needs to be transferred to you, right? Like, so then it's just our responsibility to figure out how to do it. And then I think to come to you all and say, are we thinking about this right? You said you need capitalization. We're trying to figure that out. You said you need like other people to take on the risk, figuring that out. So I guess I'm always really mindful of that balance between asking people and letting people know what's going on, and then be really careful about pretending that we're doing engagement as a city, which we're not that great at in general. And then just like executing on what people said they want. You've been saying for 20 years what needed to happen. We shouldn't have to keep asking you, but we should be open to feedback. And we are.
My apologies. I'm working to unmute Anna because she had to rejoin us. So we appreciate your patience. Are you good now, Anna?
I am good. I switched to my cellular service, so we should be good for now. I don't know what's happening with my internet. Okay, great. Sorry about that, everyone. So did you both get chances to respond?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, they did. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So the next question is, what types of funds and resources will be available to businesses along these commercial corridors? When are they expected to become available? And I know this is all really in flux right now with, COVID and funding having to be reallocated. But if you know or have kind of ideas, that'd be excellent to know.
So one of the more significant portions of cultural districts is the
commercial property
acquisition, commercial property acquisition fund, and that was for those who maybe have not heard of it, it's basically our best attempt at creating like an affordable housing trust fund for commercial businesses, because we want folks owning their businesses, and we want the communities that have made the districts to benefit from that. And this was going to be our first year deploying those dollars. We are in a state where we have to cut possibly up to $200 million out of the city budget, because we're going to have a shortfall, meaning that we're going to, that we're not, with all the money that we collect, we're going to collect that much. We're going to lose out on collecting that much, potentially up to $200 million. My intention, while I know we have to make a lot of hard decisions, is to hold the line on that fund, because I think it's really important. I think us owning our businesses are really important. I'm going to stop just short of promising that I'm going to hold the line on that fund, because I know that everything has to be up for debate as we talk about the budgets. And that when we talk about, whenever we get into a conversation about layoffs or furloughs at the city, it can be really hard to choose something like that over someone's job, right? And so I'm going to work my hardest to hold that line, but I just kind of wanted to be realistic with you all about where we're at because of coronavirus. Mm-hmm. And so there was the 2.7 million, and we will keep you guys up to date if that amount changes. But there was also a decent amount of money set aside for, cleaning streets and doing maintenance. I'm not sure the status of that, and maybe Shaun, you'll have a response. But the last thing I wanted to just to highlight is that because of both coronavirus and now the wake of kind of destruction we saw with the unrest, the state and potentially the federal government are also looking at creating packages. And so we've been in touch with the state. There's a lot of support for a $300 million relief bill that could come into Minneapolis, and Northside would be included in that. And it's in 3 phases. So the whole $300 million is not one big lump sum. There's sort of 3 phases about how it would be rolled out. And I think some of the phases have more support than others, but I'm hoping that we get all 3 phases. I certainly think we deserve it and need it. So, yeah.
That's great to know.
Thank you for that, Councilmember. To add, there are a couple of key things to watch. I know it's a little bit harder to catch city council meetings these days, but I would just say that it is actually really helpful to hear directly from our businesses what the priorities should be. And so one of the ways, again, I will look to others to say, how they feel this works, but I always encourage people to send a letter of support for the things that you feel should be in the budget to the mayor, to the council members, and I always say the full council, and then copy me or like the staff and work with on those messages. And then you can put a simple sentence in the bottom of that or at the top of that, say, please enter this into public record, and feel free to say this during the proceedings about this. And, so often we do that only when it deals with policing, you guys. And we actually need to have like that level of response related to keeping to how funding works, to how programs are rolling out. Like Felicia, I've heard you say multiple times, like great that we created the Minneapolis Gap Fund, and like doing a lottery was not okay, right? Like that was not okay. That is actually something that needs to be in writing, whereas many people felt like that was the most equitable way because of how the applications came in. It's like, there's a bigger system at play that we do have to constantly be monitoring. So as Councilmember Ellison was saying, there's that $2.7 million in the budget for the Commercial Property Development Fund. To be super, super clear, this was, of all of the things, I think every council member that's been a part of this and the mayor were supportive on, but this was actually the primary project of the council member and the mayor at the forefront of this. So just know that, actually the mayor and I were talking, I think it was last night or the night before, and he was like, look, I just want you to know that here's where the budget is, and like, I'm gonna do everything I can to make sure Commercial Property Development Fund stays in there, because this is about people actually owning, right? This is about wealth creation. And if people wanna play around with the other stuff, that's okay, but we need to make sure that people come out of this hole. And I was like, great, let's do it. Let's tell people about that. So there are actually, you have the schedule. There's actually even a meeting today at the Policy, Government, and Oversight Committee. There are several things that are happening in the next few weeks, including a hearing related to CPED that people will likely be interested in on, I think, June 30th, the POGO meeting today, and other things. And so I'm just like, watch our calendar and start chiming in. If you have trouble getting in and weighing in or giving feedback for any of the public hearings coming up, let us know. I think it's also really, really important to be honest about the fact that we don't know the timelines on any of these things, okay? So cultural districts have not been officially designated in the city just yet, right? In the budget, the mayor's kind of done his part. The budget's been taken care of. I think, Councilmember Ellison, Council Vice President have been really pushing that forward. And we've run into this, I think, challenging place. And so the question becomes like, how do business owners advocate for getting that done pretty expeditiously so that we can deploy the capital? And I said to the mayor, one thing we might have to look at is like how he works with council to shift if that money has to no longer be labeled as cultural districts because of council process or anything bigger. So there's just like the political side of it that frankly isn't really appropriate for this time, like people need the cash flow. If the Commercial Property Development Fund is able to move forward relatively quickly, we kind of have a good sense of the buildings and the projects and the people who've had interest. It will become available. I think we've talked about it a lot at this point. And so it'll probably be the easiest fund for you all to tap into in some ways. The other pieces are related to federal programs related to our disaster declaration, which is why you've seen like city vehicles coming throughout, even by your residential areas, literally calculating the damages that occurred in response to the murder of George Floyd. That is something that we're asking the federal government to do. I will tell you that we have people at the legislature on both the Republican and the DFL side right now who are fighting. We have assurance adjusters. There's talks about like bonding for demolition in places that need to be torn down. We're talking about, you know, what it looks like to create a fund that goes directly to businesses instead of being an intermediary. What it looks like for to have funds go straight to the city with very little strings attached. Who knows where that lands because we don't control it as a city, we just advocate for it. I want to make sure you all know about the what I call four categories that we've been advocating for in terms of resources that come down from the state and federal level. And I'm going to condense here cultural districts, the response to the murder of George Floyd, and the COVID-19 pandemic a bit. So the first is we're saying it is helpful and it is necessary to do everything we can to make the building owners whole, right? Like if you had property that was destroyed, if you had property that was damaged, we agree and want all of the support that we can get to help you all fix your buildings. The second thing that we're saying is like a bunch of our business owners are not our building owners. And so it is insufficient for the state or the federal government or the city or the county to stop at simply putting up new structures or helping people with their facades. We have to get money to the business owners. The third is that we have to do something to take care of our workers, right? Because of the public health pandemic, so many people were already out of work. We're saying to them, we need dollars and we need your help to try to make our businesses whole. And in all three of those, really lifting up that actually it's majority Black, Indigenous, people of color owned businesses that did not qualify for any of the funds that were coming out, with the exception of the city fund, which was very, very small and only touched a fraction of the total need that we had. Mostly because of, well, actually only because of the budget. And then that fourth category that we've been advocating for is that like, actually these corridors are really beautiful. Like you all have done an amazing thing by continuing to make these investments and like choosing areas like West Broadway and the other cultural districts. And that's a story that people need to tell. We're not asking for charity. What we're acknowledging is that actually our cultural districts are the epicenter, along with downtown, are the epicenter of this state's economy, not just the city's economy, but the state's economy, right? And so we're looking at ways to quantify that and tell that story, to talk about how we actually have more than 300 businesses in North Minneapolis, some of whom have government contracts and those sorts of things. So that's where we're at on advocacy. The timeline is really hard to tell. Sorry to be so long-winded.
Thanks so much. No, that's really helpful. And your point about, you know, making sure they're important, that's something where we send out resources at the end of all of these luncheons. And so that's something where we could even draft like a sample letter for everyone, and then you can kind of add your own stuff. So then you have an easy way to submit that for advocacy purposes. So the next question, and it's actually a question in the chat too, and then we're going to get to the chat, is what if the blue line comes down West Broadway? How will this affect its designation as a cultural district?
Yeah, I can take this on a little bit. So the short version, and I think the official answer, possibly the most likely answer, but I hope not, is that there's currently no plan for the blue line to come down West Broadway, and I think that while there is some legitimacy to the fact that the blue line is severely held up in its current route, there's not an alternative route. I think that, you know, if this wasn't quite the question, but if I had to sort of, I guess, give my my editorial on how I feel about the potential of the blue line coming down West Broadway, I mean, first off, we'd have to really fight for that if we wanted that. And I feel two ways about it. One is, I feel like if we can get a lot of businesses owning the buildings along the corridor, and then a rail line comes through, I think that that would be extremely good for the neighborhood and for the business owners who live in the neighborhood and who are owning those buildings. I do see a potential that if the rail line comes through, or if people think there's a rail line coming through, that is going to incentivize current business owners to sit on that land, not sell it, and then when the transit comes through, it'll enrich those folks and not the neighborhood. And so And so that's the thing with transit-oriented development. That's the sort of the double-edged sword, is that it can be a benefit and it can be an accelerator of gentrification as well. So that's kind of my feelings about it. If it was going to come, I would really want that discussion to happen a couple of years from now, after we get a lot of folks owning their buildings, a lot of Black and immigrant and Southeast Asian and East African business owners owning their buildings. Then transit infrastructure would be a major benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I fear that we're sort of setting ourselves up for a net harm to the community that exists there now. It's my opinion. So.
Yeah. In addition to what you're saying, Councilmember, and that official voice of like, there's nothing that we have seen, even in our office, that suggests that there would be a diversion of the route from Penn down West Broadway. I take a slightly different experience to this. Like I often lament about what has happened to Lake Street and Uptown. And, as a transplant here, coming from a huge transit community in Chicago, I remember going to these small businesses on Lake Street, even as a kid coming up here, right? Like really small mom and pop stores. And then I remember moving to New York for a little bit to do work and coming back, and I was like, whoa, there's an Apple? What happened here? But I remember that before that happened, all of those businesses that were really established along Lake Street struggled as the road was torn up. And that was just a lane, that was actually just street improvements. That wasn't to put a light rail in. So, I kind of think about Minnesota in this way. One, it's been the private sector. It's been business that's largely funded and built out our transportation infrastructure, and we are disconnected. And West Broadway itself and many of our cultural districts sit in the middle of transit-dependent communities. And so we need public transit that actually connects people to their people and to their work. What we don't need is necessarily a light rail that goes down a commercial district. And here's why I say that. I'm actually a huge light rail and train fan, but bus rapid transit typically doesn't require a street to be torn up as quickly, right? And so I think about it from that way. Like there are tons of ways to get, in this case, that east-west connectivity that would actually emphasize the walkability, get you more people and all of that sort of thing in the area without actually tearing up the infrastructure that's under you and making it even harder for people to park if they're parking. The other thing that I would say about transit is, in addition to like you have to own it, is that in order to make it work, we have to find a funding source, right? And like just overall, our state always kind of devalues transit infrastructure. And right now, I'm looking at what they call the opportunity costs, right? Like, do I want billions of dollars being put into more studies along a light rail? Or do we want to be advocating for that money to come straight into our business community? I'm of the latter, because I think that we have other ways that we can meet the transit needs of people and get them connected up with your businesses and each other. Personal opinion on that. That's just like my own analysis. And I think my position, even when I was the EDA over at the Harrison Neighborhood Association.
Awesome, great. That is really good to know. Because I know that that's been a fear for a lot of people, just kind of rumors circulating about that. So what we're gonna do now is move into audience questions. And so I got 2 before the luncheon people sent to me. So I'm gonna start with that. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna move into allowing everyone to ask their questions, kind of have a Q&A. So the first audience question is from Mary Terrace, owner of Strive Publishing. So it is there a way for the city to provide ongoing and sustainable support for growing a cooperative of related businesses? For example, providing a building for a collaborative arts center. So kind of, is there an incentive to do more of that collaborative business building inside of the cultural districts?
Ideas like this have been discussed before. I know that for a long time there was some discussion. I had some desire to sort of activate a choice auto body, for example. I think that taking one of these empty buildings and making them safe enough for occupancy and regular use, I think can be always a hurdle. I think it's a hurdle I think it's worth us taking that. But I think for a long time, I used to sort of operate under the assumption, well, you've got an empty structure, we can fill it. And then I've learned that it can be quite dangerous to put someone in an empty structure depending on the state of that structure. It can be, I think a building is a lot more like a machine than I think I ever quite recognized, right? It's a lot more like a car or something, right? It's not just an empty shell, and if it's inactive, you can activate it. Putting people in a building that's not ready to be occupied can actually be really toxic for their bodies. So, I think that those are always kind of the hurdles, but I absolutely want to see that happen. And think it's important for us to lean into those ideas, especially as we think about, the various ways in which we're looking to support people in their wealth building or in their, in their sustainability. To the question of sustainability, I think that it's always got to be an extended conversation, especially now because with the budget shortfall, almost everything feels unsustainable, right? Like plowing this winter is going to feel it's going to be a uphill battle because of how much money we're going to be losing as a city. We're going to get it done, and we're going to recover, and we're going to continue to, the long-term answer is yes. But I think that if you're having the discussions that we're having as a council, the questions of sustainability feel fraught on all fronts. But I still think that the short answer is yes. We just have to have a conversation about how we get there, what sustainability looks like, and how we build it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only thing I would add to it is just a technical thing for people, or really relates to the budget. Most of what you ever see come out in terms of a budget announcement or something like that is what's called one-time funding. And so there are programs in the city that they're on 20 years of one-time funding, frankly. But just know that the sustainability question for us is if it gets ongoing funding, then it becomes a part of what's called the base budget, and it's not negotiated year after year after year. And so things that end up in our base funding are things like the workforce program, a lot of our workforce programs that are not federally funded, things like, water infrastructure and those sorts of pieces. The bigger question that I always have for us, because we say cooperatives, and I think of co-location and shared space and all of the other models to come together, some of those might actually be easier to fund, and the city government and the city of Minneapolis as all of us as a collective can always do much better at actually fundraising and asking our financial partners to capitalize some of these things, because the little bit of money that you'll get from a city will never be the same as having the line of credit or straight equity into a project to co-locate your businesses or to get operating capital. And so I think that's actually the bigger long-term play, is to have the city partner with business owners to get the sustainability through the private market as the owners of the capital sources.
Great. Okay, so one more previous audience question, and this really relates to gentrification. So I know there's not an easy answer for this, but what is the strategy for the unsheltered along the corridors, especially, with gentrification possibly increasing in light of all the business damages, the pandemic, businesses being displaced, and how could cultural districts possibly mitigate that?
Yeah, I can hop in on this. So, cultural districts wasn't really designed to deal with the challenges that people who are unsheltered face directly. And part of the work is to make sure that the districts have the amenities that are appropriate for the area. For example, I think many of us know what's happening at Powderhorn Park right now. That's very different from what pretty much any other area in our city, and certainly along the proposed cultural districts is experiencing. So I think the short answer that I would say on this one is is like an acknowledgement that it actually doesn't, right? And that there's a different strategy. And right now there is a multi-jurisdictional team that comes together. It's not the work that I do, but there's a multi-jurisdictional team that includes the county, the Met Council, and all of these other partners that really deal with the, usually our social service infrastructure. That usually is not directly the city. That's usually the county first. All of those agencies are coming together with the city to figure out a long-term solution. To the gentrification, I think is going to be twofold. On West Broadway, it's a little bit different, right? Because the city and the county do own some land. But the other thing that we have to do is, there was an introduction of a notice for sale, which would be helpful so that everyone just knows when there's a private owner that is attempting to sell their property, which we do not have control over. We are in conversations with people at the state that are working to allow municipalities to essentially capture those lands. And then the other strategy that we are talking about in some of the broader Minneapolis Forward Community Now Coalition work and others is like, we know that there needs to be land acquisition. Who's going to be the holder? I would argue that we don't want the city or the county to be the holders of those properties. We probably want, like a business or others to step in on that work. So that's one aspect. And the second I would say is like, we're going to have to encourage our neighbors who are building owners not to sell their properties. Like that is the easiest way to prevent gentrification is like, don't sell your property. Like tell us what you need to be made whole and to take care of your things, but don't sell your property to someone outside of us. Or if you have to sell because some people are just in that financial situation, help us. And when I'm saying us, not necessarily the city, but like let us as community come around you and help you find a proper transition that is a community supported transition of that property so that we don't have other people coming in acquiring.
I think also what needs to be highlighted is some of our basic assumptions about what gentrification is and isn't. And I think that if you look at the way that like Shaun and I think of it, not every new building is gentrification. Mm-hmm. Not every new business is gentrification, mm-hmm. right? To me, gentrification is inherently, it's sort of like, it inherently sort of takes wealth out of the community. And it's not even an aversion to new people being a part of the community. New people move in and out of North Minneapolis all the time, right? Like folks are mobile around the city in general. So it's not about excluding new people either, but it's just to say, is this amenity for us? Is it made with us in mind? Do our neighbors have some kind of stock in it? Do they hire folks who are also from the neighborhood, right? If the people who live here are the solution to maybe vacant storefronts or properties, if the people who live here become the developers of, vacant parcels, to me, that's not gentrification. I don't even think mm-hmm. that falls under any definition of gentrification I understand. I think it's when those things aren't happening that's the threat. And I think that the cultural districts is designed to specifically work on improvements that spring up organically from the neighborhood, and not designed to just I call it this "please come" attitude, where we give tax breaks and whatever to any rich person from outside the community, just to say, oh, please come. We don't care what you, big box store, fast food, we don't care. Just please come, right? This is antithetical to that attitude. It says we're going to support the stuff that organically springs up from the community. As far as addressing unsheltered homelessness, one of the things that I have noticed is that the city becomes sort of like a shorthand, because it's what people understand for a lot of problems that people see on the street, right? And so in government, and this is not and people don't make these assumptions because they're uneducated or whatever. It's complicated. It's hard to know. But in government, we try to split up certain tasks so that no individual body is overburdened. So traditionally, handling unsheltered homelessness has been in the purview of the county. I think what we've been finding in the past 2 years, I'm just going to finish this thing. I'm going to wrap up real quick.
Okay. Sorry. We have another question.
what we've seen in the last 2 years, especially, or at least since my time in the council, is that we are realizing that our constituents expect all hands on deck when we're dealing with issues of unsheltered homelessness, when we're dealing with a whole host of issues. I think that the council and the city are waking up to that mindset. You saw that as we sort of waded into addressing the wall of forgotten natives. We waded into that conversation, I think, for effort, right? But it was also very clear that, this is what it looks like when you spend several generations as a city thinking that this is a county problem.
Yes.
Right? We didn't have the internal expertise. We didn't have the internal infrastructure to really address those problems in a way that I think we need to be at the table addressing those problems. So we're building that infrastructure now. I think we learned a lot from our response to the Wall of Forgotten Natives. We certainly avoided catastrophe because just a few weeks after we got folks housed, when it came to the Hiawatha encampment, we had the polar vortex that I think we would have seen devastate that community had we not gotten them sufficiently sheltered. But it wasn't perfect either, and so I think we learned a lot of lessons from that. I think you're going to start to see a lot more intergovernmental collaboration since that happened.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just say that there was a comment about taxing, and taxation is one of those things that has to be reevaluated. And so they were seeing some different models start to emerge. But this piece about like, if the taxes are rising and people are already struggling to afford the spaces, ownership is that much more challenging. I think Lisa or Alyssa, I can't say, popped that in and just want to acknowledge that.
Great, awesome, thank you for that. So I'm just gonna move over real quick because I know we only have like 10 minutes to some of the questions that people have put in the chat. So the first one that I'm seeing here is Mitchell Davis is asking, how does the cultural district topic we are learning about dovetail with the mayor's announcement last week about the 2 groups that will guide the city's recovery from unrest after the murder of George Floyd?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the short answer is that we basically have overlap in a lot of the people who've already fed into the cultural districts process on. My sense of it is that what we're trying to do is we're not going to bog down what now is a city process to get these things designated and wait on that work anymore. We're going to keep going, right? It's going to be the same set of solutions that are going to be community rooted, right? That we're going to ask our foundation community to stand up behind. So instead of waiting for a designation, we're basically saying to all of our partners, and I'll just tell you some of them who've said yes, are like TCF, the POLADs, and others. We're saying, great, you usually are at a table figuring it out. What we're asking is that you let the co-chairs and a core strategy team source all of these solutions from community. And then we're going to ask you as funders, as investors, to stand behind the strategies that they've identified. It's basically the same premise. It's all about the city doing business differently and getting the money and getting these resources to the most impacted people first.
Great, awesome, thank you for that. And then another question is, can you talk about how nonprofits are considered in cultural districts versus for-profit businesses? And that's especially relevant with West Broadway because we have a lot of nonprofits and public buildings.
Yeah,
and that's from Betsy Ulthimer.
I think that's
Betsy,
probably
hello. So I can wade into that a little bit. I think what we decided was that because the Commercial Property Development Fund in particular is not just there's not only, I think right now the initial money is just city money. But eventually we're hoping that foundations will sort of buy into this fund, especially if it means that we are helping, Black businesses, immigrant businesses, indigenous businesses, and other POC businesses own the spaces they live, that we will get sort of buy-in into this fund. And And so, but we also recognize that for a lot of these corridors, it is the businesses that are at a steep disadvantage when it comes to buying and renovating their places. And so with, $2.7 million can like kind of sound like a lot until you are, but when it comes to development, it's going to get eaten up really quick. And so I think that when thinking of all things being competitive, this initial round of dollars, I think was set to prioritize, businesses. But that as we grow the fund and as we continue, and I'm hoping that the future of Minneapolis sort of has, for a long time, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund just put an annual 10 million in the bucket, right? I think we need to get there, right? I think we just need to have this as this shouldn't be a novel. We're launching it now with 2.7, but this shouldn't be a novel concept. We need an annual sort of allocation in the realm of 10 million. We need to work our way up to that. That nonprofits would eventually be a part of that. I think also, with the exception of some nonprofits, a lot of the nonprofits that you see are not necessarily POC run and owned, even in North Minneapolis. And so that if we had like, so that if we had like small Black-owned businesses, some of which are like doing their thing, tearing it up, but like out of the corner of another business, right? Competing with, largely white-led, institutionalized nonprofits that wouldn't necessarily be in equal footing. But then there are also nonprofits along the corridor. Appetite for Change comes to mind. Obviously, Juxta, people probably know my long history and relationship with Juxta, that are POC led and run and really serve youth and really set youth up with entrepreneurial skills. The intention is not to exclude them either. So, but just wanted to name some of the logic behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Those are good points. We want to be able to build wealth with this fund and not just support, outside institutions. That's a very good point. Let's see, there's another question. I know we're kind of running out of time, but I know some people talked about this. Okay, I can't find it, but I remember it. So the question is, will there be priority given to Black developers, in regarding development of West Broadway's cultural corridor or developers that represent the different cultural districts that they're doing development on?
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to this. This is one of those things where the law is an interesting thing. So we technically cannot legally say that we are going to prioritize Black developers explicitly or exclusively. Mm-hmm. What we can say is we are going to prioritize developers who are currently located in or who have done work in or are community vetted in this geography, whether that's a zip code or census tract or pick a location. What I will tell you is that there are many of us in the city who say that, like, there was a time where slavery was legal. So, right, the part of this is not about what's law, it's also about what's just. And that's where we're advocating, and we're constantly trying to figure out how we do that without drawing a lawsuit that then prevents us from actually doing the work. So that's one. The other thing to acknowledge is that actually we're talking about West Broadway, and we're talking about many other cultural districts, but just as I was speaking earlier, it's not just one group in each of these areas, right? So, you might have a Hmong business owner that's on West Broadway. Like, West Broadway is not the best example in that situation, but certainly in most every one of our commercial areas, we do have a variety of ethnicities represented. And so we need to be mindful of setting this up sort of centered on the anchor community there, but it is not exclusive because it's, we don't have a monolith in any one of our communities, including North Minneapolis, to be honest.
Yeah, I'll add just a little bit that always annoys me when we have these conversations is that the historic harm named Black people, exactly, right, and named Indigenous people, yep, and others to be harmed.
Yep.
But our solutions can't name people, or else, you know, we'll be accused of racially discriminating against white people. And I just always find that to be really silly, but it is the legal reality that we are under, where we were allowed to be specific about the harm. We're not allowed to be specific about the remedy.
Yeah, this is why we're, you know, you'll hear myself and hear both of us really be like, yep, there's a way to get this directly to the people, right? Because you all have a certain, like WBC and the board, like you, as an organization, can choose to do different things. N.E.O.N can choose to do different things. Alpha and all of these other groups can choose to do different things, and that's critical.
That's a really good point.
We can choose well, it just takes us longer.
Is there a way for individuals that, you know, feel strongly that priority should be given to people that are representative of the community? Is that something where you could submit a letter to city council? Would that kind of advocacy do anything? I guess that's kind of a hard question to ask, but, or is it just kind of more trying to circumvent and give the funds to organizations, like you said, that can make those determinations?
Yeah, I certainly can't speak for the council, but what I will say is the thing that I say all of the time is, as I look around at the various groups who've been advocating for one thing or another throughout not just the pandemic, they've been very specific about the community they're advocating for. And again, cultural districts is also about a destination. What I will observe is that I rarely see Black people, Black Americans in particular, in this city come together and demand an outcome that benefits Black people directly. I don't see it, right? If there's an issue that's going on with undocumented folks, I will get, no lie, within a couple of hours, 500 emails in my inbox from Latinx community. Mind you, they're not the only group of people who have undocumented members in their community, but like, I will just get that. If there is some group feeling like they're isolated, I get it. I am on every Native homelessness group and I don't do housing. But I have yet to be like, I've yet to see a message come from Black business owners that says, really excited about Black Business Week. Thank you for doing that. Let's do more. These are the things that we expect and that we know we need, and get that like 1,000 people. I would welcome that. I think it's what we need. I think as, you know, just as somebody that's in that space, I love to be able to say, hey, Councilmember Ellison, did you know that 800 Black business owners said that this is what they need? I love to be able to say, hey, Mayor Frey, did you know that this entire corridor stood behind this and this is what they're saying? It matters. I think we actually do have, particularly in the mayor, I'm not going to name everybody here, but I think the mayor, Councilmember Ellison, Council Vice President, in particular, absolutely support community. And we need, as communities, to start standing up and saying, this is what we expect, because it's always going to be, you know, those 5 or 10 people that have access that are going to tell people what they want, but it's nothing like 1,000 messages and letters and affirmations coming from the Black community to say what they need.
I would add Councilmember Cunningham to that list, and I would of
Yes.
folks who are pouring their effort into supporting our businesses, and I'll just say, like, I think that we as a community, and I'm speaking not so much as a council member, but just as somebody who's born and raised in North Minneapolis, in a Black context, in the Black community, we've been sort of taught that if we just make it Black, then that's going to repel support. We're going to lose, you know, yada yada yada. But I think that we should feel comfortable saying, hey, look, you know, when we assert a sort of the needs of Black people, we are not doing that to the exclusion of anyone else. And you know, like, yeah, I do interface, you know, when the Hmong community wants to call me to come speak to Hmong elders, and, you know, like, it is very specific. It is very, you know, the scope is narrow, and that's okay. They should be allowed to do that, and I gotta be responsive to that, and I am. But I think that we should also be allowed to do that as Black people, and we shouldn't feel uncomfortable just because, you know, history's taught us that, you know, we're not allowed or whatever. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, yeah, I will say, I really lament that it feels like it's really the only group that I don't hear from very consistently at a business owner level, and as a collective, is the Black business community. Really, really grateful to everyone else for stepping up and being forward, pushing in that. But I know we're jaded in a very different way sometimes. We're exhausted in a very different way. We have more sole proprietors. We carry more of the burdens, especially with Black women being the majority breadwinners in households, right? Like it's a totally different dynamic. And so I guess I would just say that you have people, certainly in the two of us and the mayor and council vice president and council member Cunningham, who are ready to try to do this differently and figure out ways to bring it forward. You know, and again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. Sometimes also, like, we just don't need to ask because we actually know what the problems are. And so I would say if you don't hear from us asking specifically of Black business owners, what do you need, is because we kind of know, because we've been saying the same thing for forever. But being able to activate with that specificity, like many Black business owners have been doing over the last 2 weeks as it relates to like getting out and telling these legislators what you need. I mean, I have to say, I was sending some last minute stuff over to Felicia and Devon and Kenya and many people on this, and Warren and people, and just being like, look, I just saw it, I'm sorry, but they need to hear your voice. And like for hundreds of us in a matter of a few hours, because you all were trusted in carrying that information to be able to activate, it actually shifted the way the state was thinking about deploying resources into community. You know, when Commissioner Grove came and walked West Broadway, he saw that actually part of the funding has to deal with the blight. You know, so it was really impactful to, even despite the lack of trust with the city of Minneapolis, it made a difference to have you there. And I would just ask that you keep holding our feet to the fire and also keep trusting, and then being like, look, y'all messing up, you're off base. We're gonna be at that next meeting, but this is what we better get out of it. That's actually good and that's helpful, and that's what every other community does to us.
Thank you so much for joining us and for this great discussion. I know that there were a few questions we didn't get to. I have captured all those, and so we'll make sure to send them to Councilmember Ellison and to Shauen, and then I'll make sure to compile some resources for everyone and send that out next week. So before we go, I know that we're a few minutes over time, but I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. Also let you know that there are resources compiled through N.E.O.N, and then I'll let Felicia talk about the resources that they've compiled, both to address the COVID-19 pandemic with various emergency funds. I try to update that every week, and so definitely look there for the updated SBA's EIDL loan that's become available again, and then the updated terms for the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. And so I will send that out to everyone. And that's become a lot more forgiving. So definitely please look into that. And if you have questions, definitely don't hesitate to reach out to a N.E.O.N business advisor. And then we've also compiled a list of different legal help, cleanup efforts, volunteer efforts for Northside businesses that have been damaged, and individuals that don't have access to food right now and other resources because of what's happened. So I will send that out next week. I'm just going to quick turn it over to Felicia, and then we will let everyone go.
Yeah, I'm not going to hold everyone very long. I just want to say thank you to everybody who was able to attend today's Northside Business Luncheon. Food is at Sammy's, so if you are nearby the corridor and you have a chance, and you have time, go ahead and stop by there and grab something to eat. There will be some vegetarian options as well. I put my information in the chat. I put links for N.E.O.N in the chat. We'll be harvesting that information, and there's also been a request to grab like the business card information and get that out to all of you. So be patient with us as we put all that together to send out that follow-up email. To make sure that you're on that email list, be sure to have gone to the Eventbrite. That link will be available until 5 p.m. today. Go to the Eventbrite and make sure you RSVP there. That automatically gets you on our list to know about all the Northside Business Luncheon stuff and all the exciting things we have to come, okay? And then I want to throw it out to our panelists. Well, first of all, thank our panelists for joining us today, finding the time. I know all of us are getting ready to go to other meetings, but I also wanted to mention to our panelists, we have quite a few Black business owners who gather every single month on the third Thursday of the month at around this time for our Northside Business Luncheon. So if you're ever really looking for a way to find some intentional space around finding out what Our Northside business owners and Black business owners, specifically if you're looking for that demographic, need or want to imagine, keep joining us here, okay? All right, so email me if you have any other questions. I'm getting back to them as best I can. I appreciate everybody for joining us. I'm gonna unmute everybody for just a second, and then I'm gonna shut this meeting down, okay?
Thank you.
All right, I think everybody should be able to unmute themselves and say goodbyes and hellos and see you later.
Bye.
Peace, everybody.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, people can't unmute. Okay.
Oh, they can't. Let's try that again. Now you can. Unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
wonderful
Thank you.
information.
Blessings,
Everyone have a
everyone.
good day.
Y'all be well. Great job today.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I know.
Thanks for joining, everybody.
Let me find out y'all trying to keep me on mute.
Thanks for hitting me back so quick.
Devon, this is a crazy question, but like between you, Devon, and Felicia and Kenya, like, do we have a group chat or do y'all have something? Because I'm just realizing, like, if everybody sends an email, there's no way I would be able to respond to people. But like, if we had a group me or something, we could ping pong answers or action alerts back to people.
I'm good with that. Devon, you signed me up for a meeting. I got that email. I'm like, I didn't sign up for that. Devon signed me up.
That's starting to happen to me more often. I just suddenly get a meeting. Yeah. I appreciate y'all for keeping me in the loop, though.
Yes. Thank
That was a nice way of saying that.
you.
All
Appreciate
right, y'all.
Have a
I'm
great
going to go
day.
ahead and close down this meeting because I got some more meetings to go to. I appreciate everybody. I love seeing all the faces when y'all join these meetings. Thank you, Kenya. Good to see you again.
You as well, Queen.
Hey, Jerusalem. Hi. Thanks for joining.
I didn't even realize Lester was on. Hey, y'all. Thank you so much. See some of y'all at 4.
Yeah, peace, y'all.
All right, y'all.
We appreciate you taking time to tune in to this month's Northside Business Luncheon. You can find out more about our future luncheons by signing up for the WBC mailing list that can be found at www.westbroadway.org. The West Broadway Business and Area Coalition, we lead initiatives to bring businesses, nonprofit organizations, and neighbors together to create an inviting and vital West Broadway corridor. I truly believe that working collectively, we can transform the Northside into a thriving economic community. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all next month. Bye.